Welcome, everybody. Very glad that you're here. Grateful to be here with Calvin McKee. He is a senior diversity and inclusion specialist at Shopify. So thanks for joining us for this workshop on the one thing you need to find success as an ERG.
Thank you. Perfect. Hi, folks. Thanks so much for being here and for coming to hang out. I appreciate it. I'm used to being a facilitator and giving space for other people to have conversations, so it feels weird being here on stage by myself. So hopefully you'll be able to, pardon me, hopefully you'll be able to answer and share some prompts and your own thoughts in the chat, because that would be lovely, so that I don't have to talk to Annette myself for the next little bit. But would love to know, just because most of the chat was focused on employee resource groups, so would love to know in the chat if you support or work with employee resource groups, and if so, if there's a particular community that you support. So if you want to just go in the chat and let me know, that would be wonderful. I've worked with, I guess, while folks want to reply, background is that I've worked with employee resource groups for about, I guess, 5 years now, which has been really, really cool and interesting to see that it's sort of shaped where my career has gone. I started working with employee resource groups back 5 years ago at Uber, where I joined their Pride ERG. And I had no idea what I was getting into, how I was getting involved, what an ERG was. I just saw an opportunity to work with my community, to give back, and ideally potentially get to travel a little bit outside of my actual job. So I jumped on board, just sort of thinking this would be fun, great way to network and connect with my community. And then it turned into this, what is now, 5+ years of working in employee resource groups, and what I essentially get paid to do at Shopify, which is to support 8 community resource groups, and help build and amplify the work and the messaging that they want to do, and really create and improve the employee experience for folks in our underrepresented communities. So it's been an incredible journey and really, really cool. And so it's exciting to see other ERG folks, because it can be sometimes a very thankless job, but one that has such incredible value and impact into a company's employee experience, to its culture, and to really its talent attraction as well. So thank you for all of you for answering in the chat. Thank you for being involved with employee resource groups, because I think they make such a difference for a ton of employees, and the way that people show up and feel comfortable and confident and feel like they belong at an organization. So thank you so much for sharing. I wanted to play just a quick video. I saw, I refused to download TikTok because I think that it would be terrible for me, because I would just get distracted and end up watching things forever. So instead, like a grown-up, I just watch Instagram Reels instead, which is basically the same thing. But I came across an Instagram Reel actually 2 days ago that I wanted to just share, because it was really hit on some of the things that we were talking about. So I'm going to just share that for, it's 45 seconds long. So let me just play that for y'all to see. And then if there's any thoughts that you'll have as we watch this, just let me know. This is about it talks about overthinking, but it's really kind of connected to what my talk was all about. So hopefully this works pretty well. And let me know if you can't hear. I'm going to mute myself, so hopefully you can just hear the audio from the video. So let me know if you can't hear it.
Is your advice to overthinkers?
A quote that has helped me immeasurably, and it's from a book called The Horse, the Boy, the Fox and the Mole. And one of my favorite quotes out of the whole book is a boy and a horse are in the woods, and a boy says to the horse, "I can't see a way through." And the horse says, "Can you see your next step?" And the boy says, "Yeah." And the horse says, "Then just take that."
Wow.
All of the time we look at the goal, we look at the future, we look at the end game, we look at how long a journey it is, and we feel overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Instead of that, just go, right, I'm not going to worry about that, because that will come. With each step, you will get closer to that. So I don't need to worry about how far away it is. All I need to focus on right now is my next step.
So I watched that probably on repeat 4 times, and I was just this is so, I think my Instagram algorithm has clearly been listening to me and me practicing for the talk that I was giving, because it's all the content that I've been getting. But that just, I don't know, really resonated with me, and I was this is so perfect coming into today. So yeah, I think just the approach to setting up, small goals and especially focusing on one thing has really helped me be able to prioritize the work that I want to get done and the work that's important and has that high level of value and impact, but also really just supported me, especially as a volunteer lead. And so when I was, doing just employee resource group on the side of my desk, it was something that was super passionate for me, but something that I knew, I couldn't give all to because I had to do my full-time job. And so being able to say, like, I can do this one thing and put a lot of focus and intention and commitment to it, really was able to help like differentiate between like doing a lot of things and thinking like this will be really great for the community, when realistically it was doing really minimal things and we had minimal turnout and engagement versus just doing sort of like, here's one thing that I can give you in my 3 months, and seeing that really sort of like explode and have incredible engagement. So yeah, it works for me. I think like, especially if you are someone who is a volunteer lead, I think it's just a really healthy and sustainable way to be continuously engaged, still passionate about that work, but also feel like you're giving a really healthy amount to both your, I think like your personal life, but also like your work and then this sort of side of desk job as well. So yeah, I think we can go into some questions. I have a small activity that we could do in a little bit as well, but I can answer some of the questions in the chat or in the Q&A if that works. So Peter said, have I seen ERG successfully going global besides the women leadership one? Yeah, I mean, I think so. We're still working on that. I would say like at Shopify for sure. We're still trying to build that. And I think, recently going into the digital space, there's been positives there's been pros and cons, right? The pro being that like being digital, it's easier to access and be global, right? We can connect and talk to people really quickly and easily. But I think the con is that we lose a lot of that human element, that in-person spark that you get, that a lot of ERGs really thrive in. Being able to just sit in a room and be in a space with folks that identify in the same way or have that same sort of experience as you, is really motivating and really exciting. So it's been challenging on that front, but I've definitely seen it. I think, previously coming to Shopify when I was at Uber, I would say most of their ERGs, if not all of them, really had a huge global presence. And when I was part of that team, I was a sort of a regional lead for Canada, and we had a North American team, which was about 6 or 7 of us. We had a Latin American team, which was about 7 or 8. We had folks across the EMEA and APAC regions. And so we had fully set up regional teams that were dedicated to supporting the employee resource group across the globe. And so I've seen it. It happens, but I wouldn't say that it doesn't always need to, I think it's a great end state and end goal. But I think it's also okay to recognize, where you're at and being able to just start small and showing up for your employees and for your community, and just sort of those small ways to make them feel recognized, heard, accepted, and feel like they belong. So yes, I've seen it, but it's a challenging thing to do. Penelope asked, how have you dealt with sensitive issues supporting LGBT community on a global scale? We have colleagues all over the world still want safe space, all despite local regional regulations. Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's a challenge. I think there's a space where we try to create a space where folks can come and share their thoughts, feelings, in an open and safe space, and one where they can do that within the community. And so whether that's within Slack, whether that's in Microsoft Teams or any other tools and technologies that you have, is creating those groups and spaces where folks can create that connection. But I think it's also really important. I think there's an important piece to remember too, that especially when it comes to employee resource groups and volunteer leads, is that it's not necessarily their job, right? There's folks that would work within an HR talent sort of perspective and department that can support a lot of that work to ensure that there are, spaces set up, but also that there's like, your policies reflect the values that your organization has and the way that folks can show up and live authentically, and also connect and communicate authentically to their peers and their colleagues and their coworkers. So I think just recognizing that it doesn't have to be on the ERG to figure out and solve those problems, but can actually go to the folks that have those full days and are paid for that type of work to be able to say, here's the feedback, here's what we are experiencing, here's what our community shares, here's what we would like to see, or here's how we can help. And so I would say like really focusing on how you can work in tandem with like an employee resource group or volunteer leads with folks within an HR sort of perspective or legal or anywhere else across the organization to really update and improve those policies and create community spaces for folks to have those conversations. So hope that helps. Sorry, I'm sticking in the Q&A and realize that people are probably chatting in the chat, so sorry. Ken asked, I have a group of people in my organization that are essentially an unstructured ERG. They'd like more structure and framework to become our first official ERG. What would you recommend as structure and framework? That's a great question, Ken. I think, I came into this with like ERGs sort of already being created. But one thing that I sort of recommend when folks are looking to start like new ERGs or new spaces is really just like starting the community first and foremost, right? Is like creating a space, whether that's in Slack, whether that's in whatever your intranet may look like, and creating a space where like, hey, this community can be, look for folks that want to be volunteer to sort of like spearhead just the conversations as like, community moderators, and invite people, tell them to invite their friends, make notice that like, hey, these communities exist, and see what conversations sort of come from those naturally and organically. And then from there, I think it's about like creating just a few sort of expectations around what it means to be an employee resource group. So thinking about like, if they've created and they want to be there, like why? What's the purpose, right? Is it to improve the employee experience? Is it connect with like the organizational's mission and are supporting like, the product or the work and the client experience or whatever that looks like? And so really trying to ask them like, what is the purpose of creating this employee resource group? And then from there, asking them to figure out like, cool, like what's one or two things that you want to do throughout this year to really support that, and then really giving them the guidelines. And so, for example, at Shopify, we have what we call belonging campaigns. And so every ERG has 1 month where we really get to highlight and spotlight the work that they do. Typically, it's around a significance sort of day. So February, we celebrate the Black ERG for Black History Month. March, we do Women's ERG for International Women's Day or International Women's Month. And sort of goes down through all sorts of things. And so in that month, one of the sort of pieces as a program manager that we set was that there's, a few non-negotiables. One of them is that they have to have a social moment, right? It just needs to be like an opportunity for folks in the community to come and connect. Another one is that they have to do something intersectional, do something with another ERG, right? Really make sure that we think about what does allyship look like and how we can support these communities and not just gear everything to an audience that likely already knows. And I think a lot of ERGs have had that experience where, for myself as part of the LGBTQ, we've done workshops that are about like, just like I guess I'll say like educational pieces around being part of the LGBTQ plus, like what do the acronyms mean? What are all the different identities? What's the difference between gender identity and sexual expression or sexual orientation and all those pieces? And so when we think about like, cool, we've put that on, when we share that, it goes out to community that likely already has that knowledge or insight and doesn't necessarily need that education. So we think about like, how can we be more intersectional with the work and share that messaging to people that actually may not know or not have that insight or knowledge. And so thinking about those community and intersectional moments are some of those ways that we do that. So I think starting with the why and then sort of asking them to build a little bit of an engagement strategy and then think about, how are the ways that they can show up on a regular basis for employees. So hopefully that answers your question. Steve asked, what would I tell someone whose manager tells them it's not important to engage in a community like an ERG? Oh, great question, Steve. Thank you. I would push back. I would say like, I would sort of ask them like why they don't. I would ask them sort of what their understanding of an employee resource group is. I think it's very fair that many folks don't know what an employee resource group is or the impact and the value that they can create. I think from there, I would go into a place of sort of talking about the impact and value that employee resource groups can have on somebody's ability to feel like they are accepted in a workplace, that they feel like they can show up authentically because there's a community of folks that support them, versus folks that they feel like they can be open, honest, vulnerable, and really build a lot of trust with. And I think when you get into that conversation around talking about how it allows folks to show up authentically, it leads into how folks can actually do their best work at the organization, right? And so if I feel like I can show up every day at 9 a.m. and I can talk to people that understand me and fully accept me for how I present myself, how I dress, how I communicate, how I identify, that allows me to do just great work. Come in and say like, cool, you know what? I'm a recruiter. I'm just going to like do the best possible job that I can, because I don't have to worry about what people are thinking about me, what people are potentially saying or concerned about the way that I'm potentially dressed today. And so I think having that community and having ERGs and being involved in that work really creates that space for folks to just show up and feel like they belong in an organization. And then I think for someone to participate in that leadership experience, I think it goes back to what we've been talking about really all day, is that passion piece. I think like I got involved with ERGs because I was excited to get involved with my community, but be able to give back. And that has helped propel my career. I was able to look at ways that I could connect with the broader organization and network and partner with people that weren't necessarily in my department or that I didn't get to work with. And through that, I was able to not only like upskill myself, both as a leader, but also able to support my teammates and other folks and be able to present a ton of opportunities for just higher engagement across the company. And so I think it's an incredibly rewarding type of work. It's so important for professional development, and think it can incredibly upskill you in areas that you wouldn't have ever sort of considered in your typical sort of like day-to-day job. So that's what I would say. Thanks, Steve. Great question. Penelope asked, how do I handle succession planning for your ERG? Yeah, great question. So I'm very fortunate to be in a position where I support employee resource groups. I've been in both where we've had, project managers or folks within the DE&I space that support that, and then vice versa, where there's like, you just sort of figure it out. And so I think in both my time at Uber and my time at Shopify, we there was a limit to how long you could be part of the employee resource group leadership team. And so at Shopify, we say 3 years. And so that's how long you can be within the leadership team in a specific role capacity, just so that I think, it takes at least a year to navigate all of the type of work that you're doing in the ERG space. If it's new to you, then it's just like a lot of context to build. So by your second year, you're really ready to like hit the ground running, do some really great work. And then understanding that some initiatives are going to take longer than potentially 1 year, especially when it's like a side of the job desk. And so 2+ years gives you that opportunity to build those connections, network, work towards, potentially doing impactful work like changing policies, really amplifying and making really positive change on like what the company culture potentially is. And so we say 3 years. From there, we have teams that are really exploring like what it means to have, alumni leaders and how they're involved. And so we're open and always willing to have folks just like be immersed in the employee resource group experience. We don't really like turn folks away, but we do have like a structure for the leadership team, which is about 7 or 8 people. And then from there, they have that sort of 3 years. So then every year we sort of connect. We see who wants to continue in the work due to their bandwidth, due to their potential role changes, if they're staying at the company. And then we open up sort of like an application process in which folks can apply to take part in any of the open roles that we have. So open application process, and then about a 3-year sort of term for the work, with really the idea being that we ask for a 1-year commitment, knowing that just so much can change. So it can be really difficult to obviously commit to 3 years. So a 1-year commitment for that. So thanks, Penelope, for the great question. Steve, my favorite random Shopify store. There's a lot. One of my favorite, we call them merchants. One of my favorite merchants is, they're called Glurups. They're slippers, and they are the most comfortable without being like too warm. So like my feet don't get all sweaty and gross in them. I just shared it in the chat. They're wonderful. That might be the Canadian one, but they're wonderful. They look like the insides of like your winter boots if you are somewhere where you have winter boots. But I promise they're like so comfortable and honestly the best. So highly recommend, check them out. They're great. I have a question. So when you think about focusing on one thing, how do you prioritize what that thing is? That's great question. I think here's a thing. I like to believe that I do this well in my day-to-day job. I think I really amplify this for employee resource group leaders in the idea that they are volunteer leaders. And so that's where it's like, I want to make sure that for somebody who's doing a full job and then doing this side of the desk job, that it's really sustainable for them. And so one thing that has really helped me, at least from the ERG perspective, is we've pulled in, it's a model called the 4C model, and it's from Robert Rodriguez, who has done a ton of work with employee resource groups. And he essentially has created 4 pillars for employee resource groups to focus on. And those are community, commerce, culture, and career. And so as I think about what the ask is for our employee resource group leaders, it's to commit to one of those pillars per quarter and set a primary goal that connects to that. And so rather than thinking about like, hey, here's all the ideas I have, trying to figure out what should I prioritize, this really helps us identify 4 key areas that support the work that they're doing. And so for one quarter, they can pick one of those 4. So if they pick career, their goal will connect to career. So it'll be about, maybe hosting a panel of senior leaders that are from their community to talk about, their career journeys and progressions and the advice that they have for folks in their community. If they want to focus on commerce, for us, that's a big part of what Shopify does is all things commerce. So we would invite some of our merchants in. So we would, if the owners and the store owners of Glurups, let's say, is a Black woman, we would maybe say, hey, come in and have a conversation with us during International Women's Month or Black History Month, talk about, what it means to run a business, what it means to be, an entrepreneur in this space. What's your journey with Shopify? How can we support that? And so we figure out ways that we can connect a goal with one of those 4 pillars that we've seen from Robert Rodriguez. So highly recommend that. He's got a book, which is called Employee Resource Group Excellence, which is super helpful, and highly recommend just that model for being able to help prioritize some of the goal setting. And then being able to just focus on like that one thing because it's connected to, you can hit each of those 4 pillars within a year. What role do I think the DEI manager should play in ERGs? Is it a facilitator role, responsibility role, or is it more of an ERG leader's role? Yeah, that's a great question, Ken. I think I'm quite active in being able to set up a lot of structure and foundations and support for the ERGs, but they have a ton of autonomy and flexibility in how they operate as a leadership team, the type of work that they get to do, the type of activations, events, and really the goals that they want to set. I want to be there to support as someone who, this is my full-time job. I want them to be able to say like, hey, we want to do this event, but we don't have the contacts, or like, we don't know who we should reach out to or connect to, or hey, we want to connect with like a senior leader. Can you help us with that? And I want to be able to be that branch of support to say like, yes, I want to spend my full day like doing the things that you don't have the time to do, and being able to amplify your work. So I want to be their hype squad. I want to just be there to make things like really easy to support this like passion area for them, essentially. And so by being able to set up some of those groundworks of like, here's the foundations, here's like, really clear pieces that I need to see, makes it really easy for them to come in and have like no ambiguity of like, how do I come into this space? How do I work? What are the type of like things that I can or can't do? I want to make that really clear. And so that's how I view my perspective of supporting the employee resource groups as like a program manager from the DE&I side. And then really just making sure that we can amplify the work that they do, and that they can help sort of provide a lot of feedback to the work that we as a D&I team are doing across the organization. And so being able to work a lot more in tandem of like, hey, you're not just like people that I think report to me, but rather I want to run, here's my goals, here's the work that we're trying to do in across the organization. Like, how would this land in your communities? Like, how is this something that like you can support or provide feedback on so that we can, do the things that feel really right based on the missions and the objectives that we have as an organization too. So if that helps. Penelope asked me what ERG initiative I'm most proud of. That's a great question. I think the photo campaign that I talked about in my talk is recent, so I have some recency bias to that one, because we got to do a lot of really cool storytelling internally about folks within our community, and really just spotlight the careers and the journeys that they've had, understand why they came to Shopify, why they care about entrepreneurship, and what that means to them, but also really just the experience of like being a queer individual, and what that looks like on the day-to-day basis. So we got to do a lot of really cool moments like that, and I just got to meet some really incredible people. I got to take part in one at Uber where we celebrated the Day of Pink, which is typically in April. And we created little cards, essentially. They were like business cards, and we handed them out to, or we put them in all of our driver support centers, which were all in person. This is years ago, before COVID. And so we had all these driver support centers across North America. And we had business cards that we would hand out in all of these hubs, basically to promote the Day of Pink and encourage all Uber drivers to wear pink on the day of, for all of our employees to wear pink on the day of, and then share a lot of messaging within the application for riders and drivers to wear pink, to celebrate the Day of Pink, to understand like what it was, the importance of like being against bullying and discrimination, and really just watching for that. And so that was really cool to see just the engagement that we got from drivers from all across North America, which is really, really cool. And so, but something that started in something that was an idea to like do in Ottawa, and then to see that come through in just like all throughout Canada and the US was really, really cool. So those are two pieces for sure that I'm very proud of and had a really cool opportunity to be involved with. So yeah, thanks folks. Thank you for so many questions. I so appreciate it. Again, it feels weird like not being able to see y'all, but I'm so appreciative of all the engagement. I love to connect with folks that do all things ERGs. I am by no means like, I have tons to learn when it comes to the ERG space. And, we have 8 employee resource groups at Shopify, but, coming from Uber where there was like, I want to say 12 or more, there's a lot for me to learn, for me to discover and explore. And so please connect with me on LinkedIn or here throughout the rest of the day, because I would love to chat more about employee resource groups and the things that you're doing. This is community type work. I think we all are really seeking to do some of the same things in our organizations and to see the same impact and value, to be able to support employees that are from underrepresented, underserved communities. And so for me, like all the sharing, all the connection is the best. So please don't hesitate to reach out and connect to me, and we can chat all day about this type of work. And if you need support, like please let me know. Please reach out. I'm happy to do that as well. But Ken asked how I would recommend seeking out exec sponsors. This is a great question. So this is funny enough, actually something that I'm hoping to do in the next few months. So this is like my one goal and priority right now. I don't fully have the answer to this question, Ken. I can tell you sort of the approach that we're taking here, because it has been pretty difficult to get them, find them, and keep them. So for the most part, like we don't really have any expectations and guidelines for exec partners. Well, I like to call them exec partners. Exec sponsors has a connotation that they will provide money, and I don't want that to be necessarily what folks think of when they think of exec partners or exec sponsors. So I change it to exec partners. Do with that what you will. I mean, if they want, I would love for them to give the community and the ERGs money, but that's not the main reason we go to them. So for me, the first thing is really thinking about like, what are the expectations and the guidelines that I can set up for someone like a senior leader or an executive to be involved, right? These are folks that have minimal time to dedicate to something that they may be passionate about, but typically you're going to see them maybe like once a quarter at most to get involved. And I mean, if you can find folks that are willing to do more, then that's amazing. But we want to make it really clear of like, here's how you can get involved. Here is like what we ask of you in the sort of the most basic sense. And here's the value add for you as a senior leader and executive to do this type of work. And so for us, it's thinking about like, how can we create that buy-in first to want to be like involved and want to come and support. And then from there, I'll be working just directly with all the employee resource groups to think about like, are there people at the organization that are either engaged with your community, that you have relationships with, or that you think would make for great executive partners here. And I think too, like I think it's a conversation to have with each of your employee resource groups, but we have had exec partners in the past that identify as being part of the community, and they are engaged and they're passionate and they know the challenges and the obstacles that folks in those communities face. And those are great because they will do a wonderful job of, speaking to that. But I think it's also equally valid to have an ally, someone that doesn't identify as being part of the community there to represent and speak on your behalf, because you get to really amplify what that experience looks like, be able to talk to someone who may not have that full depth and insight, but is ready to learn and has that willingness to do so. And that can be really valuable for an organization as well, because I think, naturally, maybe not naturally, I don't want to assume where y'all work, but in a lot of cases, when you start to look at your C-suite and your executive level, a lot of it is probably white men. And so when you're starting to think of like, hey, we need somebody from our community to come in and be the exec partner, you're going to go further and further down until you potentially find that person. And so being open to having that ally to come in and show what good allyship looks like for that community can be really powerful as well. So I think it's start with like, what are you looking for? What is the ask for exec partners to be involved? And then either play off the relationships that you have with folks, or try and build sort of what that value add is for them and try to promote that of like, go to the execs or the most senior person that or someone in your department that you can connect with and that they can help share that message or ask, and try and put that sort of recruitment piece out. But we can continue chatting, Ken, because I have this quarter to see how it goes. And so lots more work to do in the space here. So if anybody else has thoughts and feelings or tips for executive partner sponsor pieces, like, please let me know. Beautiful. Well, I had a small activity that I wanted to share, and this is really just to bring it a little bit back to what is the sort of topic that I talked about here, and it just sort of gets you to reflect. So we won't do breakout rooms because I would be hesitant to join one as well, but really just reflect upon yourself. So the activity is review yesterday. And essentially the ask here is to take the next like minute or two and go through, your Google Calendar, your Outlook calendar, take a look at the meetings that you had yesterday, the work that you set aside for yourself, look at your to-do list. Like, what did you do yesterday, essentially, or whatever your last working day was, and review and reflect upon that. So what were all those things that you accomplished in the day? And so write those down on a piece of paper. And next to that, write a Google Doc if you're tech. And next to that, write down, like, what was that for? What did that, meeting or piece of work or task help you, progress towards? So like, was it a specific project that one was for? Was it a specific objective or professional goal that it relates to? And so the idea really is to think about, as you go through that, actually, I'll leave it at there for now. So just take like 1 or 2 minutes, do that, take a look at your calendar, take a look at your to-do notes or your notebook or journals, wherever you sort of organize yourself, and just write down all the things that you did and accomplished and what those were 4, essentially. I'll leave the slide up and you have the reflection questions there for a minute, but I'll share in a sec. As you think about that, I would love to see if you want to share in the chat, if you have just a rough estimate or approximate of just how many separate things you were working on, right? Like how many different either projects were these connected to, or separate goals or objectives, how many things you were working on. So feel free to share in the chat if you, how many things you have going on. 5. Iris says 5. There's a lot of things. I know looking at mine, I think I have about 3 or 4 different pieces here. And I think, as I reflect on that too, it takes me back to the tweet that I shared earlier from my talk, which really, again, is like figuring out like how can you focus not just on one thing, right? And so when you think about you're making small progress on potentially 4, 5, 6 plus things. And so thinking about like, what does that mean for your level of focus, your level of commitment to potentially that project? It's just something to reflect upon. And I think, one thing that I've put in the reflection question is like, what would happen if you focused on just one of those for a whole day, or rather a whole week? How much work could you potentially get done on that project? How much could you, move that progression bar towards completed or done? If you were able to just say, this is the one thing I'm going to do today, or the one thing that I'm going to do this week, rather than saying, I'm going to do this for 20 minutes. I'm going to take a break. I'm going to do this one for, 30 minutes. I'm going to do this one for an hour. It can be really hard to like see the progression and see the productivity that you might be looking for in each of those goals. Granted, of course, I understand that if this is like your full-time role, you're probably going to have multiple things to do. Point of my talk is really to be focused on volunteer leaders, so that you aren't doing that with like, hey, I've got 1 hour spare time each week. I should work on, 5 different pieces. You're then giving yourself no time to do that. So a little bit easier to manage and multitask, completely understand as someone who's like doing a full-time role, but still being able to reflect upon like, again, how much work can you get done if you were able to actually like stop and focus on that piece for 100% of your time, essentially. And then really the last thing to chat about really is just thinking about if any of these tasks are supporting any professional milestones that you're looking to achieve as well, right? So how is this helping potentially you progress in your career, the things that you want to do, where you have some of that passion there as well. So I think it's also just an important reflection upon like, how are you spending your time? Am I giving myself the space to be productive and to really like focus and commit to this type of work? And then, how is that also supporting potentially what I want to be doing? So, yeah. So just like good takeaway questions for you to explore, and maybe think about like what your typical calendar looks like and how you potentially make some changes to some of those goals and to your days as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Calvin. This was inspirational and informative, and I loved all of the questions from everyone. Thank you all so much for showing up here, for engaging. Thank you all very much. Thank you again, Calvin. We'll see you in the networking tab and back on the stage a little bit later. So take care, everyone.
Thanks, y'all, so much. See ya.
Bye.